Social movements are failing. They're fighting the same old battles with the same poor results. On paper, social movements are more powerful than ever. Social media has enabled social movements to grow in speed and size, to reach out to previously underrepresented groups, organize protests, and help discussions go mainstream. Younger generations are growing more liberal, they are more politically active, more involved in protests and social movements, more aware of structural discrimination and social hierarchies, and more actively trying to combat these issues. Countless social movements have gone viral in the past few years. Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, and Standing Rock, just to name a few. But crucially, social movements are not winning. There is no evidence of systemic change, no buy-in from governments or corporations, and no difference in the structures that activists claim to be fighting against. The barriers stopping social movements from succeeding are unlikely to change in the future. Unless they change their tactics, social movements will be consigned to ineffectiveness and irrelevance. What is this debate about? Social movements currently focus on emphasizing structures that restrict and determine an individual's fate. The discussion focuses on power dynamics and hierarchies in society, such as institutional discrimination, microaggressions, and subconscious biases. Their focus is on forcing society to acknowledge the presence of these structures and hierarchies, and they attempt to push for change through raising awareness and educating people who may not believe that these structures and hierarchies exist. This does not work. Instead, social movements should pivot to focusing on emphasizing an individual's capacity to change their circumstances in the face of oppression. They should encourage members to do what they can within the system to improve their lives and provide them with the resources to enable them to do so. This looks like encouraging parents to send their children to school, looks like encouraging young people to get college degrees, provide individuals on welfare with help navigating various forms of government bureaucracy and administration, providing training and clothing for interviews, networking sessions for various groups, and focusing on individual actions that can create change instead of focusing on changing the overall structure. Just in case opposition says we need to do both. These cases are mutually exclusive. It cannot be logically true that one's fate is entirely determined by structures and that one can control one's own fate and improve one's own circumstances. In addition, there is a resource trade-off that occurs. Social movements need to decide what they are prioritizing. First argument for this debate. It's bad for the individual to believe that their fate is entirely determined by structures. Marginalized individuals are already aware that institutional discrimination exists. They are already all too aware of the way their race, gender, and other birth characteristics determine their access to jobs, schools, healthy food, and essential services. They are already intimately familiar with the feeling of being turned away from interviews, overlooked for promotions, catcalled in the streets, and targeted with slurs. It is unnecessary for social movements to repeatedly tell these people that racism exists because it is their lived reality. A social movement that only emphasizes the existence of these structures without providing individuals with the hope of a better life is a social movement that does not serve the individuals that it is trying to protect. It is very disempowering to realize that you are one single individual fighting against an entire society's structures. The belief that nothing you do will ever make a difference leads to the belief that things will never get better in your own life. We all like the idea that we are in control and have agency. The idea that our own fate is out of our hands is something that prevents us from improving our own lives. Second of all, there is activism fatigue. Even people who want to push for structural change are likely to give up when they realize how all-encompassing structures are. This also weakens the movement as people stop participating actively. Compare this to a belief that you are able to change your own circumstances. Individuals feel more empowered to act when they know there is the possibility of change. It is true that most people will not be able to fully change their circumstances and will still be constrained by the structures around them. However, some individuals will succeed, which is a benefit we can claim compared to op when no one is encouraged to work for individual success at all. This leads to tangible outcomes. For instance, it is statistically true that people who have high school diplomas earn more than people without high school diplomas. People with college degrees earn more than people without degrees. And social movements that encourage people to stay in school for just a few more years can help individuals make huge gains over the rest of their life in terms of quality of life and job earnings. Compare this to a social movement that focuses on how racist educational structures are and say that individuals from a certain race tend to drop out from school at a higher rate. The phenomenon of stereotype threat means that individuals who constantly hear these stereotypical messages may actually end up being more likely to conform to these messages, causing them to lose out on the job earnings and the potential of an increased standard of living over the rest of their lives. My second argument is that structural movements that push for structural change are ineffective in creating any structural change at all. Emphasizing structures that restrict individuals can raise awareness, but raising awareness is useless unless there is some kind of change or benefit that results. First of all, structural change is difficult to achieve because social movements are ineffective in influencing government policy. Social movements tend to represent groups that are already disenfranchised in society and have less access to capital. Ideally, the government is controlled by the will of the people, but currently the government is controlled by money and special interests. The government has no incentive to listen to disenfranchised or marginalized groups. These groups will not fund their election campaigns, are statistically less likely to vote, and are a numerical minority, so it's less important to cater to their interests. Social movements are ineffective in influencing corporate policy for the same reason. They are unable to offer anything to make up for the potential loss of profits corporations might face if they change their policies to cater to the demands of activists. Second of all, social movements that focus on structural change don't help individuals who need to change to understand the problem. Social movements are bad at complexity. In order to reach out to as many people as possible, messages need to be simplified. This means complex messages about structural inequality are likely to be diluted to the point of being unpersuasive. Messages about structural inequality are often interpreted as confrontational. People in positions of privilege do not like being reminded of their privilege, as they take it as an attack on their own hard work and effort, as well as on their own position in society. They might believe that for the social movement to succeed, they must first lose their own privileged position. Thus, the majority of people are actually more resistant to messages of structural change rather than messages of individual empowerment. Compare this to emphasizing the individual ability to push for change. This is a more palatable message to the majority because it causes individuals to play into favorable model minority stereotypes and ensures that individuals will be treated better by various institutions. It is easier to ask the majority of society to give opportunities to individuals of minority groups than to ask them to reorient their entire worldview in order to change the way societal structures function. On opposition, movements will agitate for change but be largely ineffectual in getting any of that structural change to materialize. This is bad because it means there will be no tangible change in quality of life for any of their members, which should be a social movement's priority. On our side, we are instead able to empower individuals by letting them feel as though they are in control of their own lives and that they have agency. Moreover, we are able to cause them to improve on their own quality of life and standard of living instead of wasting their time pushing for structural change that will never occur. Very proud to propose.